Before he died, Ken Curtis finally named the 5 actors he hated the most. If there was one man in Hollywood who seemed too kind-hearted to carry a grudge, it was Ken Curtis. To millions, he was Festus, the scruffy, sharp-tongued deputy from Gunsmoke, whose humor, loyalty, and country wisdom made him one of the most beloved characters in Western TV history. On screen, he looked like the sort of man who could get along with anyone. Off-screen, he rarely stirred up drama, rarely picked fights, and rarely let the world see what bothered him. But that was just the surface. Behind the easy smile and warm personality, Ken carried stories he never shared publicly for most of his life. Stories about people who rubbed him the wrong way, people he clashed with behind the scenes, people who left such an impression, good or bad, that he remembered them until the very end. And before he passed away, Ken finally broke his silence and revealed the names of 5 actors he truly could not stand. 5 people who shaped his time in Hollywood in ways no fan ever saw on the screen. Some of the names were predictable. Some were shocking. One of them changed the entire direction of his career. And today we're going to walk through all of them, counting down from number 5 to the actor who caused the deepest frustration, while uncovering the stories behind the tension that Ken carried quietly for decades. Number 5. Dennis Weaver. When people think of tension on Gunsmoke, Dennis Weaver isn't usually the first name that comes to mind. He played Chester Goode, the original deputy of Dodge City, years before Ken Curtis ever stepped into the role of Festus. But that is exactly where the quiet friction began. Chester wasn't just a character, he was a foundation. Fans loved him, his signature limp, his soft-spoken charm, and the way he balanced Marshall Dillon's authority with a little humor and innocence. For nearly a decade, he was the soul of Dodge City. So when Dennis Weaver left the show to pursue new opportunities, Gunsmoke faced a dangerous moment. Losing a character that popular could easily sink a long-running series. That's when Ken Curtis entered the picture. Festus wasn't meant to replace Chester permanently. Not at first. He was supposed to appear once, maybe twice. But audiences felt something different the moment Festus walked into Dodge. They loved his ragged scruff, his scratchy voice, the unpredictable humor that made every scene feel alive. And soon, Festus wasn't just a guest star, he became the deputy of Dodge City. But stepping into a role previously owned by another beloved actor comes with a heavy weight, a weight Curtis felt deeply. From the moment Festus joined the cast, comparisons began. Fans debated who was better, who was funnier, who was more loyal to Dillon, who had better chemistry on screen. Even in an age before social media, word-of-mouth comparisons spread quickly, and Curtis couldn't escape them. For every viewer who embraced Festus, another insisted that Chester could never be replaced. And although Ken Curtis was far too professional to ever speak poorly of Weaver in public, those close to the show sensed the pressure he carried. After all, he wasn't just playing a character, he was stepping into a legacy. Some insiders even whispered that Curtis resented how Weaver's shadow seemed to follow him from episode to episode, like a ghost hovering over Dodge City. The producers tried to shape Festus into his own man, but viewers still compared mannerisms, humor, even loyalty. No matter what Curtis did, Chester's presence lingered. To Ken, it sometimes felt like he started a race halfway behind everyone else. But what makes this tension unique is that there was no open hostility between the two men, no dramatic arguments, no public rivalry. Instead, it was the quiet kind, the kind born from expectation, comparison, and the invisible pressure that comes from inheriting a role fans cherished. Curtis eventually carved out Festus as one of the most iconic characters in Western television history. He brought a depth and oddball brilliance no one else could have imagined. Still, the burden of replacing Dennis Weaver never fully disappeared, and that subtle, unspoken discomfort is what places Weaver at number 5 on this list. Because while Ken didn't hate him in the traditional sense, the resentment wasn't about Weaver the man, it was about Weaver the legacy. And the next name on this list? That conflict had a little less mystery and a lot more fire. Number 4. Amanda Blake. Amanda Blake was one of the brightest stars Gunsmoke ever produced. As Miss Kitty, she brought a sophistication, strength, and quiet fire to Dodge City that no one else could match. For many fans, she was the emotional compass of the show, the heart that balanced Dylan's seriousness and Festus's rough-edged humor. But when someone shines that brightly, it's only natural that shadows begin to form around them. And that's where the subtle tension between Amanda Blake and Ken Curtis began. When Curtis joined the cast, Gunsmoke was already a well-oiled machine. Amanda had been on the show from its earliest days, helping shape its tone and guiding its identity. She'd earned her place, her screen time, her influence, her audience loyalty. She was a pillar. Then suddenly, Festus walked into Dodge City, and the audience responded with overwhelming enthusiasm. He wasn't just another supporting character. He became an instant standout. This shift didn't go unnoticed. Behind the scenes, rumors began circulating that Amanda wasn't entirely pleased with how quickly Festus grew in popularity. Some insiders whispered that she felt her long-established presence was being somewhat overshadowed by a character who hadn't been there since the beginning. Ken Curtis's raw, unpredictable humor made Festus unforgettable, but it also threatened the balance of attention among the cast. It wasn't jealousy in a dramatic Hollywood sense. It was something quieter, more human, the feeling of your place changing after years of consistency. Some cast members reportedly noticed moments where Amanda seemed distant toward Curtis. Others recall script discussions where both actors pushed for stronger scenes, sometimes unintentionally stepping on each other's territory. Amanda Blake was strong-willed, thoughtful, and deeply protective of the show's legacy. Ken Curtis was equally committed, equally passionate, and equally determined to bring Festus to life on his terms. When two actors care that deeply, friction is inevitable. Yet despite all the whispers, all the speculation, there was something remarkable about their relationship. Their on-screen chemistry never suffered. Watch their scenes together closely, and you'll find a natural rhythm, a playful push and pull, an underlying respect, and a spark that made Dodge City feel real. Whatever tension existed behind the cameras never spilled onto them. They argued privately, perhaps. They disagreed, undoubtedly. But when the director yelled action, both stepped fully into their characters, leaving the off-screen noise behind. That professionalism is part of what makes this feud so intriguing. And if these tensions seemed complicated, the next feud wasn't wrapped in whispers at all. It was filled with creative disagreements, blunt personality clashes, and genuine frustration. Number 3. Milburn Stone. If Amanda Blake's tension with Ken Curtis was subtle, the friction between Curtis and Milburn Stone, Doc Adams himself, was much more direct. Stone was one of the original pillars of Gunsmoke, a man who had shaped the show's identity from the very beginning. He wasn't just another actor, he was part of the show's DNA. And when someone has been around that long, they naturally develop a certain authority, whether they intend to or not. By the time Ken Curtis joined Gunsmoke, Milburn Stone had already built more than a decade of history with the cast, the writers, and the producers. He knew every rhythm of the show, how the scripts flowed, how the characters interacted, where the emotional weight of each episode should fall. He was protective, sometimes fiercely, of maintaining that balance. And in walked Festus Hagen, a character so different from anything Dodge City had seen before that he immediately shifted the energy of the show. Some cast members described Doc as warm and witty off-screen, a seasoned professional who loved the craft. But they also described him as someone who didn't bend easily, especially when it came to script changes, character development, or the direction of the show. So when Festus started gaining more attention and more episodes began leaning on Curtis's quirky energy, Stone wasn't always thrilled. Their friction wasn't the explosive, arguing on-set type. It was more like two stubborn rivers trying to flow through the same narrow channel. There were stories from the crew about disagreements over scene distribution, moments when both actors pushed for lines they felt belonged to their characters. Doc Adams was the wise, grounded heart of Dodge City. Festus was the unpredictable spark of humor and grit. And sometimes those identities overlapped in places where neither actor wanted to give ground. Milburn Stone wasn't afraid to voice his opinions. And Ken Curtis wasn't someone who backed down easily. Both had strong professional pride, and both believed deeply in what they brought to the series. That passion made their performances great, but it also meant their behind-the-scenes relationship had rough edges. One particular source noted that Stone, having been part of Gunsmoke since its earliest days, wasn't always welcoming to cast changes. and while he respected Ken's talent, he reportedly didn't love how quickly Festus grew into a central character. Overnight, it seemed, Dodge City had two main comedic anchors, and only so much space within a script. And yet something remarkable happened whenever the cameras rolled. Their chemistry worked. Doc's short temper blended perfectly with Festus's stubborn humor. Their bickering felt real because in some ways it was real. That natural tension made scenes sharper, funnier, and more memorable. Audiences loved watching them clash, unaware that a part of their on-screen authenticity came from real-life dynamics. Still, the friction between Curtis and Stone wasn't rooted in personal dislike. It was rooted in pride. Two experienced actors protecting the space they had carved out in one of television's most successful shows. Their disagreements didn't define their relationship, but they also didn't disappear over the years. But if this felt complicated, the next feud was much clearer and much more intense. Number 2. John Mantley. If the tensions with Dennis Weaver, Amanda Blake, and Milburn Stone were built on personality differences and shifting screen dynamics, the conflict between Ken Curtis and producer John Mantley was something entirely different. This wasn't quiet resentment or professional rivalry. This was open frustration, rooted in business power and creative control. And unlike the other feuds on this list, this one wasn't based on rumors. It was real, documented, and remembered by those who worked behind the scenes. Mantley was known for running Gunsmoke with a firm hand. He wasn't the type of producer who smiled his way through conflicts or bent easily to actors' requests. He believed in keeping budgets tight, scripts efficient, and the show's direction firmly in his own grasp. That kind of leadership can be effective, but it can also cause friction, especially with actors who had devoted years of their lives to the series and felt they deserved a voice in how their characters evolved. And that is exactly where he clashed with Ken Curtis. Festus had become one of the most recognizable faces on the show, a character cherished by fans of all ages. Curtis felt a responsibility to honor that connection. He wanted Festus to grow, to evolve, to have deeper storylines and moments that showcased more than just comic relief. But Mantley didn't always agree. He had a vision for what Gunsmoke should be, and Festus, despite his popularity, was a piece of the puzzle Mantley preferred to keep in the background rather than the center. That difference in vision sparked countless disagreements. Curtis was never loud or dramatic about his frustrations, but those close to the production recalled quiet arguments in offices, tense script meetings, and long, heated negotiations. Curtis pushed for better pay that reflected his character's importance. Mantley pushed back, insisting the show's budget didn't allow it. Curtis wanted Festus to take on more emotional weight. Mantley insisted he stay in his comedic lane. It was a tug-of-war that could have broken a lesser actor's dedication. But for Ken Curtis, this conflict didn't end simply because the show did. In fact, one of their biggest clashes happened after Gunsmoke ended. In 1987, CBS announced a reunion TV movie titled Gunsmoke: Return to Dodge. Fans were thrilled. This was their chance to see their favorite characters back in action. And for many, the biggest expectation was the return of Festus. How could you have Gunsmoke without him? CBS reached out. Negotiations began, but almost immediately the same battle resurfaced. Ken Curtis was offered a salary so low, so wildly below what he believed was fair for someone who had given over a decade to the show, that he refused. It wasn't about ego. It wasn't about fame. It was about respect. Respect for the years he had invested, the fans he had earned, and the legacy he had helped build. And because Mantley was still deeply involved in the project, the offer reflected the same dynamic that had caused conflict for years. Curtis saw the offer as an insult. Mantley saw it as business. The result? Festus never appeared in the reunion movie. Fans were furious, not at Curtis, but at the studio. Many felt betrayed, confused, even heartbroken. How could Gunsmoke return without one of its most beloved characters? To this day, thousands of viewers believe the movie simply felt wrong without Festus riding into Dodge with his crooked hat and gravelly voice. And though Curtis never publicly attacked Mantley, the tension between them was no secret. It was one of the few Hollywood conflicts in his life that left a lasting mark. This feud wasn't about personality. It wasn't about jealousy. It was about something deeper: value. Ken Curtis felt undervalued. Mantley felt he was running a business. And between those two unshakable positions, the bridge simply collapsed. That's why John Mantley stands at number 2, because his conflict with Curtis wasn't just irritation or discomfort. It changed the course of Curtis's career, altered the future of the franchise, and left fans with a reunion movie missing a crucial piece of its heart. And yet, as intense as this feud was, it still isn't the biggest one. Because the final name on this list was someone Curtis worked with for nearly 2 decades. Someone fans believed he adored. Someone who controlled the entire world of Gunsmoke. Number 1. James Arness. To the outside world, the relationship between James Arness and Ken Curtis looked picture perfect. Their characters, Marshal Matt Dillon and Festus Hagen, shared one of the most iconic partnerships in Western television history. Dillon was the stone-faced lawman who anchored Dodge City with authority and calm resolve. Festus was the wiry, unpredictable deputy who brought humor, soul, and a touch of chaos to the frontier. Together, they formed a duo fans adored for years. But behind the curtain, the dynamic wasn't nearly as simple. James Arness wasn't just the leading man of Gunsmoke. He was the show. He commanded top billing. He shaped the tone. He influenced casting choices, and he had enormous power over the creative direction. Every actor on that set, no matter how beloved, ultimately operated under Arness's towering shadow. He wasn't mean. He wasn't cruel, but his presence and his authority were impossible to ignore. For Ken Curtis, that reality created a quiet but persistent tension that never fully dissolved. When Festus became a central part of the show, audiences fell in love with him almost instantly. Many episodes were built around Festus's humor, his loyalty, or his misadventures. Fans wrote letters begging for more Festus stories, and Curtis became one of the primary reasons Gunsmoke remained fresh through its later seasons. But even with all that momentum, Festus could never rise past a certain point, because the spotlight always returned to one person, James Arness. Insiders from the set recalled moments when Curtis felt boxed in, waiting for opportunities that never came. There were episodes where Festus had emotional depth that could have been explored more deeply, storylines that could have been expanded, or character arcs that could have been pushed further, but they were trimmed or altered to keep Dillon at the center of the narrative. Arness wasn't doing this maliciously. He was protecting the identity of the show he had carried for decades, but decisions made in the name of maintaining the structure of Gunsmoke often meant that Curtis's ideas, hopes, or creative instincts were quietly dismissed. To a man as dedicated and hard-working as Ken Curtis, that stung. He respected Arness deeply. He admired his consistency, his professionalism, and the calm authority he brought to the set. But admiration does not erase frustration, and over the years those frustrations settled into something heavier, a quiet resentment built on years of being the second in command, never the equal. The irony is that the tension wasn't explosive. It wasn't yelling, arguments, or dramatic confrontations. It was the absence of those things. Arness rarely communicated directly unless necessary. He kept a distance, a professional wall that many actors, including Curtis, found difficult to read. To some, including Ken, it felt cold or uninterested. To others, it simply felt like the way Arness operated, focused on the job, not the social dynamics. For Curtis, who poured heart and personality into Festus, that emotional distance made the partnership feel lopsided. He admired the man standing next to him, but didn't feel the same admiration reflected back. The audience saw chemistry. Curtis sometimes saw a ceiling, and that ceiling never lifted. When the series ended in 1975, the cast scattered into new projects, but Curtis's feelings didn't fade. They were never loud, never vicious, never dramatic, but they were real. It wasn't hatred fueled by anger. It was a slow, quiet disappointment carried over nearly 2 decades of playing second fiddle to a man who rarely let anyone into his orbit. And when the reunion movie Gunsmoke Return to Dodge was announced years later, Arness returned as the face of the franchise, while Curtis, offered far less respect and compensation, walked away entirely. Their paths diverged in silence. Ken never publicly attacked Arness. He never aired grievances. He never tried to tarnish the man's reputation. But those who knew him understood that their relationship was one of the most complicated in his career, full of respect, admiration, tension, and unattended wounds. That is why James Arness stands at number 1. Not because of open feuding, not because of dramatic fights, but because the emotional distance, the imbalance of power, and the quiet frustrations lasted longer, cut deeper, and affected Curtis more than any other relationship in his Hollywood life. A feud doesn't have to be loud to be painful. Sometimes the quiet ones leave the heaviest mark. Before we end this journey, it's worth remembering who Ken Curtis truly was, beyond the rumors, the tensions, and the private frustrations he carried. Because long before he ever stepped onto the dusty streets of Dodge City, Ken lived a life that most people today couldn't even imagine. He grew up inside a jailhouse, surrounded not by playgrounds and open fields, but by iron bars, echoing footsteps, and inmates shuffling past as his father worked as the county sheriff. His mother cooked meals for prisoners, and Ken often watched her pass plates through the cold metal doors. Most children grow up with bedtime stories. Ken grew up with the sounds of keys turning in locks. Those early experiences shaped him into someone grounded, observant, and deeply aware of human nature, a quality that later lit up every character he ever played. He wasn't supposed to be an entertainer. He studied medicine for 2 years, following a path his parents hoped would bring stability. But Ken Curtis had a heart that refused to settle for a quiet, predictable life. Music pulled at him with a force he couldn't ignore. And so he walked away from medical school and into a world of uncertainty, yet also possibility. His voice carried him onto some of the biggest stages of the era, singing with Tommy Dorsey's orchestra and then with the Sons of the Pioneers. It was there that the world first heard the warmth, sincerity, and emotional resonance that would become his trademark. But Ken Curtis wasn't a man who stopped at one talent. Hollywood called to him next. He appeared in films alongside giants like John Wayne, stepped into stories crafted by directors like John Ford, and slowly built a reputation as one of the most dependable, authentic performers in Western entertainment. And then, in 1964, he stepped into Gunsmoke, and everything changed. Festus didn't just become a character. He became an institution. Curtis poured every part of himself into Festus. The grit, the humor, the stubborn charm, the honesty. Viewers didn't just watch Festus. They felt him. They saw someone flawed, funny, brave, and painfully human. And through that character, Curtis carved himself into television history. His personal life was marked by moments of heartbreak, challenges, and reinvention. Marriages ended quietly, dreams shifted, and Hollywood's pressures weighed heavily. Yet he found real peace when he met Tori, a woman outside the industry who brought him grounding, warmth, and a life far richer than anything fame could offer. With her, Ken rediscovered the quiet joys he had lost in the whirlwind of his career. Together they traveled, laughed, and built a home that didn't need cameras or applause to feel meaningful. And that's why it's important to look at the 5 actors he quietly disliked, not through the lens of bitterness, but through the reality of his humanity. Ken Curtis was a professional, but he was also a man. He felt overlooked at times, undervalued, and creatively boxed in. He wanted to grow, to explore, to be respected in the same way he respected others. His frustrations didn't define him. They simply revealed the emotional truth behind a career spent working tirelessly to entertain millions. When Ken passed away peacefully in 1991, the world lost more than an actor. It lost a man who represented a different era of Hollywood, an era built on loyalty, craft, integrity, and humility. His ashes were scattered over the quiet Colorado plains where he grew up, returning him to the land that shaped him long before the world ever knew his name. So as we reflect on his life, his private feuds, and his incredible journey, remember this: Ken Curtis was never trying to be a superstar. He was trying to be real, and that authenticity is why he remains unforgettable. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the hidden stories of a man who changed Western television forever. And if you want to explore more untold Hollywood moments, mysteries, and legends, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that deserves to be remembered.